Hello, Julian. How are you this morning?
I'm absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much, Bernie. It's a wonderful pleasure to be here.
I am so thrilled to have you. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Julian John, the CEO of Delsion. Now, Julian, tell the audience about Delsion. I am particularly intrigued by the work that you do because, as I said to you while we were speaking earlier on, you are a social entrepreneur, whether you realize it or not. So tell us about Delsion and the work it does.
Well, flattery is going to get you everywhere this morning, Bernie. So we are a people and development consultancy. So we talk about and facilitate organizations around people change within organizations, do a lot of development work, but 99% of everything we do is around creating equity, diversity, and inclusive workplaces. So that's what we focus on. But it's very much the people and the culture change to embed that, to allow potential to be realized, I suppose, is where the basis that it comes from.
Excellent. And for those of you who don't know, the reason for these lives is to actually get us all focused on two things. One, the whole mission of mastering diversity, and two, the people who are already doing their bit in getting all of us to start understanding the importance of mastering diversity and understanding how simplistic it is, really, in actual fact, to understand diversity and to apply it. Inclusion, allyship, equity, equality, belonging. So tell me, Julian, how does Delsion support, just practically, things that you do to support businesses to understand and to apply true diversity and equality policies and principles within the workplace?
I just want to go back a step there, Bernie, and just picked up on one of the things you said with regards to about making it easy, accessible. I think we've got to positions in a lot of places now where ED&I, if you want to call it a subject and area department, which I don't tend to like to do, can be extremely daunting, extremely complicated. What we tend to do when we go into organizations is we've got 360 degrees with the support. We can support at every single level, from going into an organization, starting to look at where they are to sort of set some sort of benchmark, but then setting a strategy. And it's really key to have a strategy which touches every area of the business. One thing I do tend to say is that you've got to be careful that you just don't create a series of events when it comes around some of this sort of stuff, but then start looking at the people, the culture, changing those policies and procedures that they fit. Then we work around a principle which we call KEEP, which is how we get the knowledge, the empathy, and the engagement into an organization to truly realize people's potential, but also understand that link to organizational performance as well. Because I think
so you said keep knowledge,
empathy,
engagement, and what's the P?
To realize potential and performance.
Potential. Awesome. That is incredible. So, it puts me in a mind, Julian, of one of the key principles, allyship.
Yeah.
Yes. Because it's really about, as you say, you don't want it to be an event. You don't want it to be a ticking of the box. You don't want it to be a policy that they have written and agreed with your your experts that go in, and then they say, oh, well, I've done it. It's in this drawer here. Yes, let's go on now to the real matters of doing business. That's not what you're about. So just talk to us about a bit more about how you ensure and support them in making it more than just an event.
Interesting, you mentioned allyship. If you want to look at a really good example of an organization that started to implement allyship, have a look at Microsoft. Because when you start digging down to it and start looking at some of the theories behind it, they've really done a good piece of work around it. I've got an interesting view on allyship with regards to absolutely a necessity within every area. However, we need to be careful of a label that sits around. some of these things. And I remember an organization that was starting to look at diversity inclusion for the first time, and they said, we want to do this big piece around allyship. And one of the things I suggested to them, I said, is you can have allyship, just don't give it the label. Just have all those behaviors, have all those actions, have all that knowledge. But as soon as you start going, I'm an ally, I'm not ally, I'm an ally to this group, I'm not an ally to that group, and I'm an ally today, but will I be tomorrow? Again, it's about labels. So the authentic piece is to try and capture those behaviors first, and then you can start saying that's what allyship is, as opposed to
fantastic
behavior to understand it.
Absolutely, because what is allyship?
Yeah.
You know, really, allyship is just, you know, it's just being a good friend. It's being a good neighbor. It's being a good boss. It's being considerate. It's being, you know, let's leave the words or the buzzwords like inclusive and so on. It's just about making people feel that they matter. And if you are in a position that you can influence those around you to make the ones that are there, everyone, feel that they matter, and that they matter in the same way and to the same extent, and they have the same amount of opportunities, then you're talking about allyship without saying the word, because you are right, you can get stuck on labels. Because I do, to be honest, I do a lot of allyship training. And so and in my allyship training, I actually do exactly what you say, and that is, let's demystify it. Let's throw away that word. What is allyship? You know, and how do you actually even begin to understand that you can be an ally? How do you recognize that? Well, first of all, to understand that each of us have some amount of privilege, and that came up in conversation yesterday with Damian Bridgman. He's doing his disability work. He's a quadriplegic. Yes. And he was in a situation where there was a young man. He was supporting a project at Chapter Arts Theatre. The young man came in to smoke weed. He told us the story. And he went out to support his other colleague to try to get control of the situation. And the young man called the colleague a spaz. And he said to him, "No, please, you are insulting me, because back in the 1900s, they call people like me spazes." And the young man said to him, "Damien, you are not a spaz, because you, Damien, you look after us. You ensure that we have money for tokens for gas. You support my mother. You make me feel safe," he said. "You're not a spaz, Damien. You are safe." In that moment, it took everything in the head, our presumptions on its head, because we would presume that an able-bodied young man would be in a position of privilege in relation to Damien, the quadriplegic who is suffering from cerebral palsy. But in that moment, what was highlighted is, whatever we might think, at one or another given time, we are in positions of privilege, we are in positions of power, and we can make a difference.
Absolutely, but one of the important things that sits around there is language. So that terminology is one of the worst pieces of terminology that can be used out there. And at that point of degrading, actually going to the point of origin, there's some real key things that we need to understand around language, and we also need to get to a point where this is about people.
Yes,
this is always about people, always has been, always will be. And it's about treating people as individuals. It's allowing people to belong. It's allowing people to be authentic in order for them to be included.
Yes, and then how do we do that? How do we do that? I just put on there highlighted Susie Davis. Thank you, Susie. Great to see you online as well with us. And Mike Leahy says, "Great work, Julian." Yes, absolutely great work.
Morning, Susie. I haven't spoken to you for ages. Mike, I spoke to you yesterday. So.
Yes. Thank you for joining. Share, guys. Let's get people in on this conversation. Yes, you're absolutely right. So how do we actually get people to understand that? Well, first of all, to be an ally, you have to understand the needs of the people that you need to help to feel that they're included. So how are you going to do it? It's harking back to what I have in my book. Shameless plug, Mastering Diversity.
Absolutely.
Mastering
It's
Diversity.
only been
Go
10 minutes,
together or
Bernie.
not at all. It is the book in that all the principles of the conference rest on. This is the book that will explain why I thought we needed to have that conference in the heart of the city, Cardiff City Hall, because in Wales, we are already championing it. We are already light years ahead of some of our counterparts, and we can do better, and we want to do better, and we will continue to do great. We have here, let me just put them on the, yes, morning, Christina, thank you. Yes, so how do we, so in this book, I talk about how do you find out? You've got to have conversations. You've got to find out what it is that makes people feel excluded. You know, everybody has a different thing that's a trigger. Go on, Julian. Come on, I can see you're ready to.
So where do we start with all of this? And for me, and from the work that we do is we go into an organization and very much try and embed a foundation of understanding around all these elements. So we don't go, we're going to do this month, that month. We try to embed this foundation of knowledge, of understanding, of inclusion to create that fantastic foundation to build upon. But the first starting point in all of this is you have to understand what exclusion is. Because if you have no concept of what exclusion is, everyone in this world has been excluded at some time.
Yes.
But you have to have that basis of understanding what exclusion is, which are my thoughts, before you can start looking at inclusion.
Yes, so please expand on that, Julian.
So if we look at just the pieces such as patriarchy, privilege, the social model of disability as such, and we start pulling these numbers together to see how, from a legacy point of view, that there's barriers that sit within certainly within the workplace. From a privilege point of view, when we start looking at the social model of disability, the actual barriers that we continue to create within the workplace because we don't have this wider understanding. And there's also, where we have these conversations, it is about those open, honest conversations to try and find out more information. One of the things I say to organizations is the knowledge you have in the organization is absolutely key. But if you come into me to try and help you, you need to understand what knowledge you already have, because I'll guarantee it's there. I'll guarantee you'll have people in the organization that will have a better viewpoint of what you can do to be more inclusive, but you haven't asked them because you haven't included them. So what
100%. 100%. You know, there's an exercise that I do when I do my allyship training, and it always proves one point which surprised me the first time, but it no longer surprises me. It just excites me when I see the results. And it is when you capture and understand your privilege. Yes? It's just 8 questions, and I ask them to tick, you know, who can tick which one, or can you put your hand up for one? You know, I have never heard a colleague make a cruel joke about people like me. Can you say you fit in that? My colleagues don't comment about my culture or religion in ways that make me feel excluded or demeaned. Can you say that you fit in that? No one has ever asked to touch my hair at work. Co-workers don't confuse me with others of my race. I rarely hear comments suggesting I'm not dressed professionally enough. Are you one of those? People rarely or never call me emotional when I express my opinion at work. I can talk about my personal life without feeling like I'm coming out or explaining myself. Or I don't often feel othered by the words of my colleagues that my colleagues use. And every time I do this exercise, and we have a mixed group of people, different races and all sorts, yes? And after that, I ask them, how many of you can say you identified 8 areas of privilege? 7, 6, 5, 4, we go down the line. Invariably, for the last 3, 1, 2, 3, we have a lot of white folks standing up, most times even more, and not because we have more white people in the room. It's crazy because we don't understand the many intersections that are that comprise the diversity and inclusion and the exclusion subject. But you know what happened once I did one, and a young lady, after I moved on, a young lady said to me, oh, Bernie, I have got to stop you because I haven't heard anything since you did that slide. And she said, I said, okay, yes, go on. She said, what if you didn't even have one? Oh, the room, there was, you could hear a pin drop, tears in everybody's eyes. We had to stop. It was actually, and I have to give kudos to, it was at an event, Reinvention and Resilience conference by Higher Tech. You know, they are great champions of equality. And they had a workshop. I spoke in the morning when they had a workshop, and it was at their workshop. So kudos to Higher Tech for creating that platform for that to happen. And I tell you, I had to stop. I took her up. We sat down and we all listened to her. No, that's what I'm talking about. We have these preconceived notions of who are the privileged, because I am privileged.
Yeah.
Look at me as a black woman in Wales. Oh my God, no, I am privileged. My socioeconomic background gives me privilege. I've always had that privilege. You know, I'm educated. I'm not obese. My religion is on the calendar. Okay, right? Listen, I am privileged. So why? Unless I realize that, I will not be able to understand the challenges of a white 40-odd-year-old homosexual man. But not see the need to try to make him feel included. So we need to understand that there's privilege that is hidden, or we're not recognizing it, and there are also exclusions and divisions and disabilities that are and things that alienate us, that are invisible.
But we also need to understand within the privilege is that there just needs to be a more wider understanding around everyone, so people actually know what we're talking about when we talk about these things. And that's the education piece that sits within there. But it also needs to be an intersectional approach around all of this, so everyone understands that some people either are a detriment, or some people have a greater opportunity because of their background, whatever it may be. But then it goes back to this basic point of understanding how people can be excluded, and for all the work that we do around behaviors, of how that really feels and what a barrier that can be for everyone. We would talk about some of the podcast yesterday, and the terminology that you mentioned earlier. That can be really triggering for people. We've done some stuff around menopause and stuff, and the impact on people, which has just been pushed aside, disregarded. It doesn't seem to be a huge. These are massive things that have a massive impact on people. At the point of becoming disabled, I was suddenly treated in a completely different light. My entire 30 years before is absolutely was cast aside because based on the perception of assumptions of a label that sat upon me. And at that point, when I couldn't get back into work for 9 years, when I'm starting trying to have conversations with people, and there's what we call this soft bigotry of low expectation, goes, well, yeah, but you are disabled, so you probably can't do as much as you think you can. Those are all the points where that creates huge barriers, not only to me as an individual, but also from a workplace point of view, to any organization who wants to try and fulfill the potential of individuals in organizations. And they're the real opportunities to take things forward. But to go back to our first point is, we've got to stop making it so complicated. We've got to bring it back to this is about people and what people can achieve. Because sometimes some of it can get lost under banners and headlines. But there's some great stuff going on. And certainly we're very lucky with the opportunities of what we have to do in the organizations that we get to work with, who are really open to say, we understand that we need to change. We need to learn more.
Yes.
We need to start looking at the wider impact of this as well.
Absolutely. And for those of you who might be listening online, please throw your comments in. We welcome to hear, your views as well. I'll bring it in on while we're here on live. We're having conversations, we're talking, and that's really what Julian is referring to. He's saying we've got to understand, and how do we understand? It's by engagement. How do
Yeah,
we engage? It's by communication. Yes, and communication is two-way. It's not just speaking, it's also listening. And that's what I say all the time. You know, you cannot be having conversations from a standpoint that I'm going to convince this person that my view is correct. So let's engage because I've got something to teach you. That's not going to work. We have to start conversations with an open mind that we can learn something. And the truth of it is, if what we believe and is true, then it will come right back full circle. Don't be afraid to have your ideas challenged. Don't be afraid to open your mind to the notion that you might learn something from somebody whom you would not necessarily look to for information and advice. Let me see. Oh, Haley Dunn from Crytech is here. Yes, Haley says she agrees, Julian. It's about people. Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't know if you heard us talking before, Haley, about the great work that you do. Listen first. Let me see now. Listen first to understand and then be understood, as Stephen Covey
absolutely.
says.
But we go back to this people point, and every single organization I've worked with and ever will work with, I always say exactly the same thing. If what you're doing doesn't have an impact on an individual or a group of people, you don't do it. It always has to go back to people, and otherwise it's a pointless exercise. But it's an interesting, one of the pieces of work that we tend to do is around social conformity. So social conformity based on 1920s, 1930 psychology. And it's based around it, as a lot of us know, is we like to conform. We all like to conform as groups. And it's interesting, I've got 2 disabled kids. And I sat there on the first day talking to my wife when they went to school, and I said, I hope they fit in. I hope they start feeling that they belong. And I'm thinking, well, how will they? Because that is dependent on everyone else around it. But when you start looking at social conformity and the fact that we all like to conform, the more inclusive an organization comes with regards to its behaviors, its cultures, the way people act in a more inclusive way, if we want to call it that, the more inclusive it will always become. Because you'll get to that point where a tipping point where more inclusive behaviors will always drive more inclusive behaviors because people in the organization
it has a ripple effect. That is what we don't understand, the power of what we do and the ripple effect that it can have. And if we see ripple effects in history that are negative, even more so, then we should adopt an attitude that we are going to do what we need to do to have the positive ripple effect. And the truth of the matter is that a lot of us are in positions of influence within the workplace and within our communities. And we know we can make a difference, but we just need to be willing to take ourselves out of our comfort zone. Susie says here, she was going to say exactly the same thing that Haley said. And Haley is no longer at CT. Oh, well, my dear, listen, wherever you are, I know you're doing just wonderful and fantastic things that you did at CT for so many years.
We'll have to catch up, Haley.
Pardon?
We'll have to catch up, Haley.
Yes.
But the social conformity piece is a really interesting piece because we talk about the ripple effect, but because we always talk around all of this. This isn't a case of if it happens. This is a case of when it happens. Because it has to. But we have this social conformity piece where you'll just have those more inclusive behaviors. Everyone conforms around those inclusive behaviors. That automatically drives more diversity. One of the pieces of work we're looking at is regards to attributes that sit in organizations. So we have organizations which are really good at doing things, but when it comes to perhaps some of the ED&I stuff, it's not landing as well. And we go, well, actually, if you're really good at something like selling, for example, let's start looking at what those attributes are and start moving them towards inclusion. When we start looking at individuals within the organization and start looking at inclusive attributes, we can identify them and we can develop them. For example, within line manager's team. But I'll guarantee that will sit within the more diverse groups anyway, and things like ERGs, employee resource groups. And then that great thing is once you've identified what those attributes are, developed them, then you can start recruiting around them. And when you start recruiting around them,
yes,
because you want those people in the you will absolutely 100% guarantee to increase the diversity of the people you want to get into the organization, because they all mirror those attributes that you're trying to look for in the first place. So there's great work that can be done around here.
Oh, excellent, Julian. Listen, man, I can't wait for the 18th. If that's the kind of conversation, and these LinkedIn lives have just made me so excited about the 18th. Can you imagine having all you stalwarts in that one place with all the people from the various stakeholder partnerships and so on? I'm excited. Talk to me now, Julian, because all of this discussion has kind of just led and dovetailed nicely into a little bit of a talk about, yes, the great old group think.
I missed that. Sorry, there's a bit of a stutter on the line.
Oh, sorry. Group think. What do you think about group think? Oh, let me see what Susie says in here. Was also going to ask, as we're including business organizations here, how important is it to think about your market as well as your recruitment? Very good question, Susie. Julian, you want to take that?
It's interesting because
yes,
organizations always will want to reach the widest possible market as possible. But very often, everyone just aims for the middle. Everyone forgets to look around the periphery. And certainly when we start looking at, use disability as an example, 20% of the population. So I'll give you an example around airlines. With the amount of publicity that sits around accessible and inclusive travel at the moment, the issues are that you're missing 20% out. From a political point of view, if you want to do it from that way, if you're not talking about disability, you are missing out 20% of the population that could be voting for you, for example. It's absolutely key. But one of the things that we tend to talk about is that these internal behaviors will drive external activities.
Yeah.
The more 100%. You know, the greater reach that you will have to sit around those markets. But where organizations do tend to fall down, they don't link it together. So again, one of the pieces of work that we're doing around is inclusive customer service. Because there's a real need around it, because the groups are forever growing, but we're not appealing to people based on what their needs are. And that's a marketing bit. And if you're not marketing properly, you're not analysing the absolute groups that you need to be. So it's really key that the market is there as well. But also when we'll follow, because the more diverse organisations are, again, the more knowledge, experience that you'll have to reach those wider groups. Yes. I was with B&Q for a number of years. And I was very fortunate to be involved in the over 50s recruitment campaign. This was in the turn of the millennium. A group of people absolutely overlooked for the workplace. I remember my father being made redundant at 45, saying he's never going to work again because he's going to be too old. Yet, within that scenario, you recruit over 50s. And one of the reasons why B&Q started to look at over 50s is because that was the demographic of their a lot of their customers. And suddenly you've got a group of people who really understand the needs of that group of customers because they're within that demographic.
Yes, but 100%. And just, you know, with Susie's question, if I would just want to add, I had the privilege of having to read the British Business Bank's report that was launched in 2020 because I was invited on the launch of it as part of the expert panel, so I had to read it. And it's Alone Together, Diversity and Entrepreneurship in the United Kingdom. I've also had to do research on the Alison Rose review. And honestly, Susie, what you're saying is 100% correct. We've got to look at our markets. We've got to look at who are we supporting within the marketplace. It should not just be about how we recruit. Because in the Business Bank report, what it actually highlighted is the great disparity between the success of Black-owned businesses and that of their white counterparts, even though the research showed that these Black-owned founders were sometimes more qualified than their white counterparts and also worked that much harder. But what the report highlighted was there are certain other things that would cause you to be successful in business. One of them is your human capital and your social capital. And a lot of the businesses that went, the Black-owned founders went into entrepreneurship, they segued into it because they felt they were not getting the kind of escalation they should have gotten within the corporate world. But what that did is that that took from them that positioning of influential friends, influential contacts. So without influential friends and contacts, without that friend, that's what we do. Let's get rid of the word allyship. Let's talk about friends. Yeah. It's really asking for friends. Without the right friends, then the support, access as well to finance, that came out in both reports, the British Business Bank report and also in the Alison Rose review. Access to finance of female founders, despite the fact that the review showed that if women would launch businesses at the same pace of their male counterparts, they would be contributing up to 250 billion pounds of value to the UK economy. Yes, they might have seen some growth since then, over the last 2 years, collectively 200 and maybe 300,000 businesses, new female businesses have been founded. But it still does not take away from the fact that there are issues with investment, issues with supporting inclusively in the marketplace. So thank you, Susie, for bringing that up.
Just to add to that, because that's a really interesting piece, and I'm going to be a little bit contentious now that I've got to run a business. I've got a bank. I don't own a bank, unfortunately, but as I said, I bank with an organisation, and I've been quite critical of the fact that they do a lot around certain protected characteristics around support. They don't do anything around disability. So while you can applaud them for what they're doing, I don't feel I belong. And I've put stuff on LinkedIn before saying, if you show me a bank which is doing stuff around disability specifically, so it's more accessible for me, I will move my business there. And it's one of the things where we focus on the silos and piece, there is an opportunity where we can all move this together at the same time, rather than waiting for certain things to be done. And I'm really glad you mentioned diverse-owned business, because I'm a huge champion of what we can achieve in Wales around that. So Delsion is the first accredited disability-owned business enterprise outside of the US. And I've done that for a reason. Because when it comes to diverse-owned business, if you start looking at supply chain and procurement outside of the UK, it is a massive market. There's a massive opportunity because organisations are really looking to procure more diverse-owned business enterprise. But there's some issues trying to identify it. There's some issues around enterprise with regards to the supports available. And I genuinely believe, because I said the social goal of Wales is to make Wales a leading nation for inclusion, because it's absolutely achievable, there's a real opportunity to create that environment of diverse-owned business enterprise. Because it's absolutely needed. If you look with regards to some of the stats that sit out there with regards to the spend of the Google, Intel, Microsoft are looking for attestations for their partners with regards to being diverse-owned. It's a real opportunity. But as with all of these things, and the same as recruitment, there needs to be a source of support and a source of engagement, and also to ensure that diverse-owned business is given the opportunities that it should do to succeed, which includes, as you said, funding opportunities, accelerator startup support and things like that. So
yes, there's a question that came through while you were speaking. So I'll just let you, is that all disabilities, Julian? I think that's where you were talking about Delsion supporting disabilities. Is that all disabilities?
For what? Sorry, Hayley?
Hayley? You want to just explain? We'll come back to that. I think she probably... Yeah.
But it's interesting when we talk about disability. It's the breadth of it is huge. So again, we go back to creating equity and treating people as individuals. We need to understand what the opportunities are when you treat a person as an individual. So, for example, my son's autistic.
Yes.
That's just with regards to what his been identified through a process of. But he's still himself, and he's got loads of different things, as we all have, to go around it. And just to pick up, Susie's point was really interesting.
Yes, I think she's explained it here. Let's get that on. You mentioned 20% of the population being disabled. Is that all disabilities? Oh, God.
Yes. Yeah. All disabilities.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
But Susie just mentioned when we start talking to organisations with regards to they just need to put in have a ramp in place. And it's interesting when we start talking about inclusion specifically around disability and accessibility, because you'd have thought they'd be absolutely entwined, and they tend not to be. So what you need to ensure is that you can have something which is accessible, you can have something, but it has to be inclusive at the same time.
Yes.
Inclusion, for me, certainly when we start looking at some of the travel aspects and some of the work that we've done around that, the people make the difference every single time. People coming forward to be able to say, what do you need? How can I help? That makes the massive difference. You can make things as accessible as you want, and it has to be accessible, but it's how people then support you around there, which I believe makes it as inclusive.
Yes, and Susie here says, totally this. I have hearing loss and need to be included too. Yes, absolutely. And there's Tom Gulick, who was on the show earlier on, and he is visually impaired, and he talks about the challenges that he had. He's a visually impaired graphic artist, designer. Come on, and he went through so much. He also went through a time when he felt he didn't want to live anymore, because he just wouldn't get any work. But then now he's formed his own business, and what he's doing is he's platforming other creatives, other visually impaired creatives on a platform that is called Stigma, was named. Yes, he is also an ambassador for Prince's Trust, doing some incredible stuff. But we do need to have more room, more space made for disabled entrepreneurs, and also to get the disabilities to be more visible. But I had to go back to a question that Haley raised earlier on, and that is, do you think that emotionally intelligent leaders are better at driving inclusion?
I've got behind me on the wall somewhere, it says leading through inclusion. So one of the pieces of work that we look at is that inclusion is a leadership trait. The best managers are more inclusive because they ask more questions, they find out more information, they take the time, they will put things in place. And I did a podcast the other day, and one of the things I got quite excited about was that I've never had someone come to me and say, my CEO, my managing director, made a huge difference to me personally. They were the reason why I'm here, because I saw them on a podcast or whatever, and that was it. I've never had it where this initiative or this accreditation or this badge that we got given, or this company got given, has made my whole world and my world of work more accessible, more inclusive. What I get every single day that we work is someone to turn around and say, my manager made the difference. So yeah, absolutely right. Emotionally intelligent leaders are better at driving inclusion. And again, the work that we're doing is around leadership and management development. So it doesn't become that when you go through leadership development, you do a 6-month program on leadership development, and then you do a 2-hour ED&I course, that you actually create inclusion as part of that. And we're looking at psychometrics and all the stuff that sits around there. But people are worried around inclusion for some reason. They don't know how to act and behave.
Yes, because that's the thing. There's a lot of fear around it. But you are spot on, and I thank you for that question, Haley. Because we go a long way. I'm all about emotional intelligence, because you can't engage properly without emotional intelligence, and it's something that you can learn. It's not something you're born with. So everybody can actually take the time to learn emotional intelligence. Learn basically to read the room and read the people, read the faces, read body language. See what actually resonates with people by actually watching for the signs of their responses, taking the time to find out what's the best way to engage, and not just with the people that need to be included, but the people that are there who need to be a part of the inclusion. And there's an interesting point that came out recently in one of these talks, and it was Donna Ali from Be Excellence. And she raised the point about even the word inclusion is an excluding, it has an excluding tonality. And I really see what she's saying, because inclusion means you are saying you own this space and you're giving me a bit of it, you know. But like I said, you know, that's where we start. We started with that and we're evolving. But, you know, she suggested infusion as a potentially better way. But the reality is there, you know, there has been that dynamic where some people have been owning this space, but whether by default or on purpose. And so we have to purposefully put in place inclusive strategies. And at some point, we won't need to use that word anymore. That's my hope. And you said something, Julian, about the times that we are in and the changes. And I absolutely believe that what's going on right now here in Wales is going to go down in history. I don't mean me. I'm talking about this new awareness and awakening for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I think it's going to make such change that is going to probably parallel what we have about the you know, we have the religious Welsh revival that's noted in history. I think there's going to be a DEI revival noted in Wales.
It's really interesting. I grew up in Cardiff in the 1970s, and a very, very diverse city, very, very diverse across all boards, and perhaps in comparison to other areas. And I think I was extremely lucky to grow up in that environment. But interestingly, my father was a second-hand car dealer in Cardiff, and I grew up in the car trade in City Road, which some would be regarded as a group of scallywags or whatever you wanted to call them. But it was genuinely, looking back, the most inclusive environment that I've ever possibly imagined.
Wow.
Because everything was based on what people said and what people did. They didn't care about backgrounds or anything like that. It was based on you as an individual. And it's always struck with me with regards to, it's genuinely up until the point that I left and moved away from Cardiff, that I've suddenly realised from my background how lucky I was to experience enemies. Now, I'm not saying that there weren't issues in the 1970s, because goodness gracious, there were. But as I said, it was just interesting when everyone was treated at face value.
Yes.
Then that drove inclusion. And it's completely separate to inclusion, but so my background is human resources for years and years and years. I've been fortunate to work at a senior level. And I always remember that I sent one of my managers on a leadership course for a week, because he'd just been promoted into a position. And he came back, he said, "Oh, I'm the best manager and the best leader the world has ever seen. This course has changed my life beyond belief." I said, "That's fantastic. And I know you've got 15 staff. Can you tell me any of their birthdays, or can you tell me any of their partners' names?" He went, "No." I went, "Well, you can't be a leader then." I said, "Because unless you know the people that you're working with, so how can you be inclusive if you around that? This is the one or the other."
Yeah, but you know, I've got to go back to what you said about when you were growing up, and I've got to say I believe you 100%, because that's what I even refer to it in my book, that when I came down to Wales, I experienced for a long time the greatest amount of unconditional acceptance. In fact, I would go further to say that my difference was my unfair advantage in the marketplace, because I went, and when I stepped in, it was like, okay, it's a black woman. Oh, and there are all these white gray men in their gray-haired men in their gray suits. So come on, I'm gonna stand out straight away, aren't I? and so people, and then I had my Jamaican accent, which I hopefully still have, because I've been holding on to it. And so even when I got on the phone and I said hello, and everybody like, "Oh, what's that accent?" I say, Jamaica. "Oh my gosh, my daughter got married there. I'm going there." And straight away I was through the door. I for me, my difference made people want to speak to me. That was my experience. However, I also, here in Wales, went through a time when I experienced some amount of racism. And so I have to say that that's the reality of life. Both truths are real. And so that's what we need to do is have less of, and I have much less of that and much more of the acceptance and the inclusion and the no closed doors. So, I think you are right about your experience, and we have these pockets, and it's just about spreading it.
Yeah, but my experiences come from privilege to a certain degree, because hey, like I was a white kid growing up in Cardiff, so we've got to have an understanding and an element of that. But it's just as interesting when I look back to see what was the most accepted and inclusive place. It was where everyone was just judged as people, basically, rather than their backgrounds or anything else, because that's how everyone was judged. And it's just really interesting to then learn that that's not always been, or that wasn't the way when I looked at other areas. So, but you're right. Wales is an absolute platform to become, as I said, as our social goal is, the most inclusive, the inclusive nation. And it genuinely is. I wouldn't say it otherwise, because otherwise we're all just going, it just looks like a tagline.
I believe it, and that's what we look at the response to the conference. And I'm not the first person to hold an event about diversity and inclusion. I will not even pretend to assume that kind of arrogance. But I can only speak for the response I've gotten to my event. That at all levels, people are flocking. And not flocking. I mean, I'm not saying people don't like me or anything, but no, it's not about me. It's not. It's about the mission behind it. It's about what it represents. Why we've had so much, take up from mainstream media, BBC, actually putting their money to sponsor. Come on, S4C. We have 3 ministers. First Minister, Minister for Social Justice, Minister for Economy. He's in America. He's sending a speech. Public Services Ombudsman for Wales, and I've got to put a shout out to them because I sit on the advisory panel, and I can tell you, those of you who think that I'm just there as a to tick a box, I'm not. I might be the first Black woman to be there, but I'm telling you, the reason I was there is that they started to do training. I went in to train, and the difference that was being made. And the opportunity came, and they say, would you like to apply? And I went through the application process, a rigorous one like anybody else. And I am there, and there are so many changes that had started before, and so many that has happened since. I'm telling you guys, people are not just ticking boxes. It might appear so, but it's not so.
No,
we really mean it.
And I think the one thing we have got in Wales, and I'm very passionate about Wales, so I'm completely biased around it. But what we need to recognize is the engagement is absolutely there. And I'll say something which I shouldn't say now, and I'll probably get shouted at for it, is that I'm quite forthright in not working for organizations who want to tick boxes.
Yes.
I've had a number of conversations where there's been opportunities to work with organizations, not within Wales. And I've said, sorry, that's just not for us. Because I'm not wasting their time, I'm not wasting my time, but most importantly, goes back to what I said, it's not going to have an impact on an individual. So there might be a check at the end of it, but that doesn't work for me in any way, shape or form. However, what we do have in Wales is that engagement. There is a caveat that sits with that, is that we need to ensure that there's results out of this.
Yes. Oh, gosh.
There needs to be someone that says, absolutely, this is the right thing to do. And this is what it's given us. So 2015, we made Swansea the first disability confident city within the UK, because it's something that I wanted to do. And I was fortunate the Welsh government came to me a couple of years later and said, can you tell us what you did? Because Swansea's now got the highest percentage of disabled people in employment in Wales.
Wow.
That is, and I don't know how it happened. I'm not taking the glory for it. But that is the impact, and we're going to get to a point where we've got to say, this is, because it's not going to happen overnight, but this has happened because we've done this. It's like me being on my diet, because unless I start losing weight, then I'm going back into eating chocolate next week. It has to have that opportunity to prove, to say, this is what it's doing, this is what it's adding to Wales. And
yes,
then the
honestly.
opportunities to take that and then show the rest of the world to say, come to Wales, because I genuinely believe you can attract businesses and people into Wales on the basis of us being more diverse and more inclusive. I'm not saying that's the reasons why you do it.
Absolutely, because if we show ourselves to be thinking in the right way and being open to innovative, because let us even go into this whole cognitive diversity, you know, and all the innovation and so on, and the ways of thinking and doing things. If we are open to all of that, you know, the sky is the limit. Afshan says we need to tackle inequalities from director, board, leadership, and executive level. Absolutely. Thank you for that, Afshan. But you know, you said something that really just hit me, is when you said that we need to show what's come out of it. What of it? You know, of all of this, what of it? And that is what that just sits so nicely with me and with the mission of this conference, because already we have a task force waiting. Now, NatWest are also one of the sponsors. Gemma Casey, the ecosystems manager. Now, I have been on the NatWest task force for diversity for a couple of years now. And we came together, Gemma and I, and spoke about it before the conference. And we said we want to actually turn the conference into a project. So what we'll do is pull from the zones, which is why we have the zones. Guys, come out. I mean, the zones are, you know, we want you to come out. We want you to participate. We want you to listen. We want you to give voice to your concerns. We also want you to pledge participation and support, because we're going to be doing a report after the conference, and we're going to be coming away with a piece of work, because we've got to show what of it, what of all of this, yeah, because it's an annual thing, and we got to make change. Yes,
but think of it this way: think of it as the Olympics. There always has to be a legacy. Yes. So some of the things that we do is there always has to be a legacy that sits behind it, which there will be.
Yes.
Just to go back to Afshan's point with regards to leadership, executive level, absolutely. And we do a lot of work around boards. We're engaging them certainly to have an understanding of what they need to look for in the organizations, but also how they need to be extremely visible around some of this stuff. But the one thing I would say is that in 5 years' time, and it's happening now, is that if you look at board level appointments, and the next level, there will always, there's growing questions at any point of appointment saying, so what have you done to drive inclusion before we appoint you into a board or onto executive level? Because it's going to happen, because it's one of the points where it's going to have to be provable. Yes. So if you're saying, how did you drive inclusion in your last organization? Yes. Well, no, Afshan's absolutely right. But there's a lot of work that going around there. And again, it's ensuring that people understand the wider impact and benefits of being inclusive. So when we start talking about inclusive recruitment and say, well, actually, yes, but by the way, when you are reaching more groups, more potential, then that's why people are looking to be more inclusive around for recruitment, for example. So great opportunities.
Fabulous. So, Julian, we're coming to the end, the last, oh my gosh. Woo!
You got me all out on a Wednesday morning.
I need you now, Julian. You're going to have to just wrap up now and tell us. You've shared so much, but if you've been watching my lives, you know, I always ask my guests to tell us, what is that one thing that if we forget anything else about what you've shared, you just would be absolutely upset if that message was lost on us today? So would you do that for us?
Before you try to understand inclusion, you need to understand exclusion. That's my one point.
That is powerful. Before you need to understand, you even get to understand inclusion, you've got to understand exclusion. That is another hour of conversation right there. You've dropped, boom. That's a mic drop statement, because that is where we are falling short. We are not understanding. How can you change something if you don't even know what you need to change? How can you? Yes. And Shelley, hi Shelley. This is very important. Change starts at the top. Shelley is an awesome woman doing some fabulous things in diversity there over there in London. I want to get her on her. She's incredible, guys. Wow, powerhouse down there, powerhouse. Thank you for joining us.
Just to stop, if you look at the 4 enablers of engagement, they're really key to what senior people can do within organizations. But that's for another conversation.
Oh, we need. Oh,
I'll do that on the talk. I'll do this as part of the keynote.
Oh, yes, that's your keynote, guys. Yeah, thank you for, yes, that's the way to round it up, because we need to go right back full circle to the purpose of why we are here. We are here because there's a Master in Diversity conference that's going to be coming to the City Hall, Cardiff, on the 18th of September. And people like Julian from Delsion, CEO of Delsion, will be there. I can't tell you all the names. Listen, guys, Eventbrite, the links are there. They've been scrolling. I hope you've been paying attention. We are going to be bringing together voices, but not just voices, because as Julian says, people who will give voice, but they also want results. We are not ticking any boxes. We are not trying to make a name for ourselves. There are easier ways, actually, and less threatening ways to make one's name than taking on this DEI thing. Right? Okay, so listen, let's come out. Yes, thank you. Shelley says, great session. Yes, thank you, Shelley. And Haley, really looking forward to the conference. Thanks for the session. Julian, I'll drop you a message. And what about me? Drop me a message too, Haley. On the catch up. I'm having FOMO. Awesome. Fabulous. Thank you so much. So we have 4 minutes left. So let me give, Afshan says, this exciting conversation. We need more of this stuff. Yes, there's more. We're going to be doing, I'm doing a live every day, every midweek day, right up to the conference, guys, because we want to, this is about stirring up. So it's giving us food for thought and what we need to bring to that conference and what we need to be expecting and what we need to be looking for coming out of it. Yes.
Yeah, and just from my perspective, I'm happy to get in. All I want to do is amplify stuff. So whatever people are doing, if I can help in any way, shape or form, it's the approach that we've always taken. Then just please reach out.
Yes, awesome. Oh, I'm not getting left out. Woo! Miguela says, thanks for the really interesting and open conversation. Thank you, Miguela. Yes, so we're on to the last 3 minutes. I have the last word. I'll say, and I'll leave you with my favorite quote. There is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood lead unto fortune. On such a full sea, we are now afloat, and we must take the current when it serves or lose our ventures. That was in Julius, a quote from Julius Caesar, and that was Brutus about trying to kill Caesar. Okay, might not have been a noble thing. What we are after is noble.
Absolutely.
Right? And now is the time. The current is served. Yes, get on it and let's do this now. Tempus rerum imperator. Time, the commander of all things. Let's do this because we go together or not at all. Okay, lots of love and blessings. Have a fantastic Wednesday. It's a hump day, isn't it? Hump day. Awesome, fantastic, fabulous. Awesome.
Take care, everyone.
Bye. Awesome. Thank you so much. Don't leave me yet, Julian. All right. All the best, guys. Take care.